What's up, everybody? I am your host, an angry stepdad who loves chopping wood and staring blankly into the fireplace, and that is my co-host, my 2005 counterpart, who is also an angry stepdad that loves chopping wood and dreams of one day killing his family. And welcome to the Grindhouse Syndicate Remake versus Original, where today we put the 1979 mega hit that put Amityville on the map against its big budget 2005 remake. That is right. Today we are talking about the Amityville Horror from 1979 and 2005, where we are going to put them head to head to see which one did it better. Now, the reason that I picked these two films for this episode is because, one, I'm not really a big ghost, like demon haunted house guy, so I don't personally have any nostalgia for either one of these that could affect my opinion. Two, I have barely seen both movies, so I'm going in pretty fresh. And finally, I remember, at least story-wise, these two films being extremely close. So basically, I wanted to do an episode where I didn't already have a personal favorite or one that I was partial to that would affect my opinion.
Yeah, I was wondering why you picked these movies to cover,
Well, there you go.
because I know you're not a big ghost movie guy. I'm not really a huge paranormal fan myself. But with that said, there is some great paranormal movies,
Yeah.
like Talk to Me's one that came out
Paranormal Activity.
recently. Late Night with the Devil,
I like
another
them when...
recent one that's, like,
Oh, great movie.
fantastic.
I like them when they're unique. I don't like them when they're the run-of-the-mill.
Yeah. However, with all that said, the original Amityville is one of those movies that I do specifically remember the first time I saw it. And we lived in a house where I will just say we had a
It was a little haunted.
lot of unexplained things that went on. And I was very aware of this as a child, and I remember seeing this movie, and there was certain parts of the original that absolutely terrified me. Now, that was before the remake was made. I do remember seeing the remake, and I've seen it, I don't know, maybe twice, 3 times at the most before doing this, but I know you said you think remember the stories being pretty close, but I remember the remake kind of getting a little out there with the story. But yeah, there's nowhere near as much nostalgia in the remake as there is in the original for me.
Yeah, when I looked this up, when I wanted to do this episode, I was surprised because it seems almost split with horror fans being about 60-40 favoring the original. So I thought this would be a really interesting episode because I did see a fair amount of people that considered the original boring, and they were kind of more on the side of the remake. And to tell you the truth, like, I was genuinely excited to see which one I was gonna like better, but my personal history with the Amityville Horror is really cut and dry. I had seen some parts of the original growing up, but it was always kind of boring to me as a kid. I did read the book when I was 16, which I really enjoyed. I gave the film, like, another go, but I only probably got about 80% through it, and I think I fell asleep. But I actually hadn't revisited this since this week, which is, like, the first time I've watched it all the way through. The remake, I actually went and saw at the movie theater, and I remember liking it for the most part. It was fun, but it was, like, nothing special. So this week was the first time I have actually watched that since it came out. So, realistically, I do not have a lot of history with either one of these, and that's kinda why I wanted to do it, was like, what am I gonna go into where I don't have an opinion?
Yeah, I will say, like, another thing, by the time the remake came out, I knew a lot of the backstory the real backstory and how a lot of the real story is refuted, and I'm sure you'll get into some of that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it really put a damper on the remake by the time that came out, and I seen that as a kid because I knew kind of the history behind it, whereas when I seen the first one, I was I mean, we're talking probably 7 years old, and I only remembered the really, really scary parts, and those moments, like, kept me up at night, mostly because it was so real for me. I didn't know the backstory, and, we also lived in this house that was incredibly creepy.
Yeah, I told you this last night, but I had actually forgotten Ryan Reynolds was in this movie. When I turned it on, I realized, like, that was the moment I realized I had Ryan Reynolds fatigue. I was just like, "Oh, no, not this fucking guy," because he is essentially just Deadpool and everything. I will say he was better in this movie than honestly a lot of the movies I've seen him in recently, minus Deadpool. He wasn't as that, same kind of nice guy, asshole, kind of funny guy routine that he constantly does. But I'm just like burnt out, man. I'm just like burnt out on him. So I was really, that is how much I remembered about this movie. So, yeah, man, I was excited to get into both of them and really figure out and I didn't realize they were so different of movies until I watched them.
Yeah, they like I said, I remembered that the remake kind of got a little crazier. I think a little further off the beating path of what the original is. I've never read the book, so I don't know the full, like, background story that's in the book, but I think the remake makes a good bit of shit up at the end.
It does. I remember the book pretty well. Yeah, by far, the original's closer to the book.
I mean, anybody who knows the story knows that there was the real life murders that took place, and the original really sticks to that. Although I haven't read the book, I've looked into it. It gets a little wild. As far as Ryan Reynolds goes, I do wish that I had not talked to you before I watched the remake because I thought about that the entire time.
Sorry.
And yeah, I will say I know that in real life, Mr. Lutz, what's his first name in real life?
George.
George, yeah, it's his name in the movie. Yeah, he was much like a car salesman, very charismatic, and I think that Ryan Reynolds played him in the beginning of the movie probably a little better, whereas the guy in the original definitely kinda seems angry from the beginning of the movie when they first moved there, but, after the first, like, 15 minutes, it was very much like I couldn't stop thinking of him being like Deadpool.
All right, so here is how the game works. We are taking these two films and putting them head to head in 6 very important categories where we will each individually award them points. At the very end, we will add them up and answer the age old question: is the remake better than the original, or does the OG remain supreme? So, here are the categories. We have tone and atmosphere, characters and performances, direction and style, impact on the horror genre, effects and kills, and number 6 is our bonus category where we kind of get to pick something specifically for the films we're covering, and that is going to be the Amityville house itself. So, with that being said, let's head into our Horror Thunderdome where 2 movies enter and only one walks out.
Hello, boys and ghouls. If you want to stay up to date on what's going on with the show, talk about or submit your movie requests, or just say die, then I got good news for you. You can always find us at one of our social media accounts or our official website at Grindhouse.Horror.Pod.com, Facecrook at the Grindhouse Syndicate Horror Podcast, Instascam at GrindhouseSyndicate.Horror.Pod, and many gore, which you can always find links for in the show notes, as always. And you know what I always say, the morgue, the merrier. So please subscribe or follow for alerts on new episodes. Now, back to the show, kiddies. Frights, camera, action.
Let's talk about some background. All right, so we'll go with the original first. The ratings. IMDb, a 6.2 out of 10. Rotten Tom, 33%. And Letterboxd, you want to guess the Letterboxd?
30.5.
Just a 3.
Just a 3. Okay.
All right, so The Amityville Horror is a 1979 American supernatural horror film directed by Stuart Rosenberg and stars James Brolin and Margaret Kidder. It is based on Jay Anson's 1977 book of the same name, which documented the alleged paranormal experiences of the Lutz family, who briefly resided in the Amityville, New York home where Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed the mass murder of his family in 1974. It is the first entry in the long-running Amityville Horror film series and was, of course, remade in 2005. It was produced by Cinema 77 and Professional Films, Inc. It has a runtime of 118 minutes. It was released on July 27th of 1979 and had a budget of $4.7 million, which with inflation would be $20.98 million today. And it had a massive box office. This is with inflation, $385.7 million in 2026 money. Good God, that's some money in the bank.
Yeah.
Almost $400 million for this. And they only spent, which would be the equivalent of $20 million.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is making some good money.
Yeah.
I definitely think that the book blowing up probably propelled.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no matter what the movie ended up being, I think that the book being as big as it was really helped those numbers. But that high of a number, I think that you got to have a good movie with that. No matter how big the story behind it is, not that many people are going to go see it via word of mouth with it being a bad movie.
Oh yeah, we're gonna touch on that. We're gonna touch on the book a little bit, the success of the book, and a little bit of the actual situation. We're not gonna go crazy with it because this is just movie versus movie, but it kind of explains this almost $400 million box office with inflation. Now, just in case you have been living under a rock for the past few decades, this book by Jay Anson was a massive success, selling around 10 million copies. But unfortunately for Anson and the Lutz family, this led to some major controversy and lawsuits over its truthfulness. Some examples of this are the priest in the story was based on a man named Father Peck Areno, who swore in an affidavit that his only contact with the Lutzes concerning the matter had been by telephone. He never went there. Apparently, though, "thou shalt not lie" did not mean shit to him because he has changed his story many, many times. Next, the people who bought the house immediately after the Lutz family, they took off and fled, they claimed that there was no damage to the doors and windows, and everything still had, the original hardware that showed, no signs of repair. So, the door busting open, all this crazy stuff that apparently happened, there was no signs of that at all. And then the red room was actually a small closet in the basement that was not concealed. There was no way that they didn't know it was there, according to the people who owned it after them. And finally, the local Shinnecock Indians rejected the claim made in Chapter 11 of the book that the house was built on a site where the tribe had once abandoned the mentally ill and the dying. There are a ton more instances about this, with everyone involved eventually all suing each other. During one of the lawsuits, George Lutz admits that they made the whole thing up. then later on changes his story for a TV special, claiming it was mostly true. If you're interested, there is definitely a rabbit hole you can fall into if that's your thing. There's a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, the last time I looked it up, it was I mean, I seen an article about one of the kids that's now grown up that was talking about how it was made up, and he remembers his parents sitting down and talking about this, like, elaborate plan, but one of the other kids completely refuted that. So, there's a lot of even down to the people who were there, he said, she said.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just honestly, we'll never know the full truth of exactly what happened, but I do think that, unfortunately, as much as I wanted to believe this story, as much as this story, the original, meant to me as a kid, or the movie, I do think there's a lot of fabrication.
So I think it's important to know that nobody who has lived there since the mid 70s have ever claimed to see any paranormal activity there, and the house has remained pretty boring since the book came out. But the reason I bring this up is because when this movie came out, because of the book and media coverage, people genuinely believed this to be a real event, which sparked massive ticket sales for the film's release, very similar to what we saw with the Blair Witch Project. Also, the murders of the DeFeo family in 1974 absolutely did happen, with Ronald DeFeo Jr. being found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, where he was then sentenced to 25 years to life. So there is some truth with the murders and all that stuff. It's just
Yeah.
the paranormal stuff with the Lutzes moving in. Like I said, there's a rabbit hole to fall into. A lot of people have said different things over the years.
The DeFeo murders, I think, is what makes this story so intriguing compared to most of the other ghost stories out there.
Well, it gets the
Is that
story's foot in the door.
we know that there is truth. Like, there is a real, like, massive homicide of a whole family who
Yeah.
was wiped out before these people even moved here. And because we know that that is 100% true, that that guy was 100% alive at the time and had been tried for murder, that automatically starts you out on the side of truth when you're hearing and seeing this for the first time.
Well, I was really let down when I came to the conclusion a long time ago that I thought that the Lutz's story, I am pretty positive that it was made up. But what really still keeps the house scary to me and interesting is the murders, because
Yeah.
that is real and that is scary. I mean, there was even children in there that died. So it's still scary to me. It's just not paranormal scary. All right, so let's talk about the remake. The ratings: IMDb a 5.9 out of 10, Rotten Tom a 23%, and Letterboxd 2.6. All right, so the Amityville Horror is a 2005 American supernatural horror film directed by Andrew Douglas and stars Ryan Reynolds, Melissa George, and Philip Baker Hall. By the way, Melissa George is the very attractive blonde in 30 Days of Night, and this was the debut of Chloe Grace Moretz. So the first movie she was ever in. But yeah,
Who is that? No, I'm saying, like, who is that in the remake?
oh, she's a
Chloe,
little girl.
the
Yeah,
kid? Yeah.
yeah. And then, Melissa George is the, member we did 30 Days a Night.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. I didn't realize she was in this either. So, yeah, I had a whole lot of surprises with the cast. And then the oldest boy, we know
Uh,
him from Butterfly Effect.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the first thing I thought of.
Yep.
Outside of Ryan Reynolds, he was the first one that really stood out to me, and it took me only about 30 seconds to be like, "He's the fucking asshole from
Yep.
Butterfly Effect."
Yeah, this
But
was a year after Butterfly Effect, too, that this
that was
came out.
such a great movie.
I agree.
Like, I don't get super into, like, there's some non-horror movies that I do really love, but not an insane amount of them. It takes a real special movie, but that is
Love
one
that movie.
that I really, really, really like.
So it was written by Scott Kozar, and it is based on the novel The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, and is the 9th film in the Amityville Horror film series. So if the name Scott Kozar rings a bell, it is because he wrote the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, the Crazies remake. He was a major producer on Bates Motel and the Netflix horror series The Haunting of Hill House.
Damn.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which we're playing around with something with Hill House right now, which was a huge coincidence.
Yeah. Well, I feel like no matter who they got to oversee what did he do for Haunting a Hill House?
He
was a
was
producer.
one of the main producers.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean,
And Bates Motel.
the fucking
Another amazing show.
you could have gave the homeless guy down the street the money and give it to Mike Flanagan, he's gonna come up with a good show. Bates Motel, though, was fucking
Good too, yeah.
fantastic. Like, I never thought that I would enjoy Bates Motel as much as I did when I first watched it. That's one of my favorite, and I know we don't have a ton of shows that are based directly off of a horror movie, but that's one of my favorite ones.
So the remake was produced by Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Forum, along with MGM, United Artists, Dimension Films, Platinum Dune, and Radar Pictures. Pretty much all of the big early 2000 production companies.
You can really tell that with the cast, and man, they were
All of it.
This was definitely, they were trying to cash in on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It was remake season, man.
Remake
Yeah.
success, and it just seems like they literally tried to get it's the equivalent of like an NFL team hiring just an all-star team of
Yeah.
coaches that have had prior Super Bowl success, and then expecting them to just go out and dominate.
Yeah.
Which there's a team who I follow that did that probably 4 years ago, and it did exactly what you would think. It bombed.
Yep. So it was released on April 15th of 2005, had a runtime of 89 minutes and a budget of $19 million with a box office of $107.5 million. A far, far cry from the $380 million with inflation that the original had. The original was drastically more popular, but at the same time, they thought the story was real. So a little bit different circumstances. Actually, so if you did inflation from 2005, the budget would have been $31.53 million, and the box office would have been $178.5 million. Still really far from that $380 million.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not even close.
So an interesting bit of information here. Apparently, MGM claimed that the remake was based on new information uncovered during research of the original events.
Oh, yeah, they tried to do that.
Yeah, but George Lutz later claimed nobody ever spoke to him or his family about the project. Once he found out about the new film, he had his lawyer contact the studio because he believed they didn't have the right to proceed without his input. Despite sending 3 letters, MGM never responded and instead filed a motion in federal court, forcing Lutz to then countersue, citing violations of the original contract following the release of the first film. Unfortunately, the case remained unresolved when Lutz died in May of 2006. So he didn't live a whole year after this came out.
Yeah. You think they had him killed?
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, we got too much money riding on this thing.
But they brought us from, so I'm willing to forgive it.
I would probably, in his situation, just assume I'd lost. There's a team of super rich lawyers that they've already probably had looking for loopholes to make this movie for probably 6 months before. They were like, all right, we found these loopholes we can use. We can steal the movie. Fuck this guy.
We got new info that doesn't exist. What'd you do? How would you even research? How would you come up with new shit?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even like where there's something where there's physical evidence. They're ghosts.
Oh, dude, that was a total marketing.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and it's I don't blame them. It's really smart from a marketing standpoint. Like, we've had entire fucking movies like the Blair Witch Project that they went as far as making the actors sign a contract that they wouldn't do anything in public for a year.
Yeah.
It's just I don't see that as a bad thing necessarily. I see that as more of entertainment. Like, if you're a viewer
I find it
going into
cheesy.
this and yeah, I think it's cheap, but I do also find it like, if I'm somebody who believes and is familiar with the story of Amityville Horror, and I find this out, and I go into this movie already believing this story and thinking that there's new information, it ups the entertainment value for me. Now, with that said, I do find it cheap. Like, I do find it like cheap little way to get more people to go see the movie, but I mean, shit. Like I said, if it increases the entertainment value for the people who are into the case and did enjoy the movie, then I don't see it hurting anybody.
All right. So we'll do a quick review. So the head-to-head recap with inflation added. So original runs 118 minutes. The budget was 20.98 million and the box office 385.7 million. The remake runs 89 minutes, so it's shorter. Had a budget of 31.53 mil and a box office of 178.5. All of those with inflation. You got to add inflation because we got to have these things head to head. So the ratings, the original 6.2 out of 10. 5.9 out of 10, 33%, 23%, 3 out of 5, 2.6 out of 5. So right now, OG, if you're just using data, OG is winning. Okay, so next I'm going to give a really quick overview of both of the film's plots so we can kind of pick out the differences. So here we go with the original. 1 year after Ronald DeFeo Jr. murders his entire family with a rifle at their home in Amityville, New York, we see newly married couple George and Kathy Lutz move into the home with Kathy's 3 children, Greg, Matt, and Amy. Despite George not really being religious, Kathy requests a priest named Father Delaney to bless the home while they get settled. But when he arrives, the family is out riding in the boat, forcing him to kick off the ritual without them. After entering the house, Delaney is swarmed by flies in an upstairs bedroom, where he then hears a demonic voice ordering him to leave, causing him to flee, where he soon gets very sick. The next day, Kathy's aunt Helena, who is a nun, visits the house but also becomes violently ill and has to leave, confusing Kathy, who, by the way, has no idea Father Delaney ever came, and each time she tries to call him, there's nothing but static on the line. The Lutz's life together quickly begins to decline over the next few weeks, with George acting aggressive and in a constant bad mood while he obsesses over keeping the home warm with firewood, despite it not really being that cold. He also starts to wake up each night at 3:15, which is the same time the DeFeos were murdered, while Kathy starts suffering from disturbing nightmares. We then cut to the night of Kathy's brother Jimmy's engagement party, where the $1,500 cash for the caterer suddenly goes missing from the home, putting even more financial stress on the family. And while that is going on, Jackie, the babysitter, gets locked inside a bedroom closet by the demonic force, while Amy sits by and does nothing, because apparently she has become friends with this evil entity that she calls Jody. After that, some other unexplained things occur, like one of the boys suffers a crushed hand when suddenly a window frame slams down on it, badly injuring him. The front door blows off the hinges in the middle of the night, and Kathy spots a demonic-looking pig with 2 red glowing eyes in Amy's second-story bedroom window. Father Delaney makes several attempts to warn the family, believing there to be demonic forces at work in the home, but after not getting through on the phone, he tries to drive there when his car suddenly malfunctions, almost causing a fatal crash. He then tries to get the church involved, but that gets immediately shot down because, it's the church. Meanwhile, George's land surveying business begins to fall apart because he has lost track of the days and stopped going to work, resulting in his employees not getting paid, leading to his business partner Jeff coming by to check on him, where he quickly realizes something is wrong. Jeff's wife, Carolyn, who has psychic abilities, gets really intrigued when her and Jeff stop by the house, where she gets drawn to a brick wall in the basement that the family dog has repeatedly scratched at. After attempting to dismantle it with a hammer, George comes down to help, where they end up finding a hidden room painted in blood red paint, when suddenly Carolyn, in a creepy deep voice, shrieks that they have found the passage to hell. The next day, we see a somewhat recuperated Father Delaney at church attempting to pray to God to save the family, when suddenly a statue begins to break, leading to him going blind. A few days after that, Kathy, who is desperate for some answers, visits the library to research the property's history, where we get a way too short research montage. She ends up finding the county records showing that the house was built on top of an Indian burial ground, as well as a known satanic worshiper named John Ketchum also once lived there. And to make matters worse, she discovers newspaper clippings about the DeFeo murders, where she notices the killer's striking resemblance to her husband George, which the chief of police finds kind of suspicious, leading him to secretly watch the house at night. We then cut to the final night, where we get the grand finale of paranormal events, which kicks off with a major thunderstorm drenching the home. We then see blood oozing from the walls and staircase, Jody appearing as the large red-eyed pig in the window, and a possessed George attempting to kill the children with an axe, but regains control of his mind once Kathy intervenes. This causes George to grab his family and escape the house before things could get any worse, but soon realizes he forgot the family dog, who was down in the basement. He leaves Kathy and the kids in the car and runs back into the house, where he falls through the basement steps and into a pit of thick black sludge. He finally makes his way back up, rescuing the dog on his way out, where he quickly joins the rest of the family in the car, abandoning their home and belongings. A closing cut then reads, George and Kathleen Lutz and their family never reclaimed their house or their personal belongings. Today they live in another state. And that is the end of the 1979 version. All right, remake. So we immediately jump in at 3:15 a.m. on November 13th, 1974, where we actually see this time Ronald DeFeo Jr. murder his entire family at the Amityville house, going room to room, shooting them in the head as they sleep. After he is caught, he claims that he was persuaded to kill them by voices he heard in the house. And once again, we cut to 1 year later, as newly married couple George and Kathy Lutz move into the house along with Kathy's 3 children, Billy, Michael, and Chelsea. So we got different names for the kids. Also, the realtor actually tells the family about the murder, unlike the original. The family soon begins experiencing paranormal events in the house, with Chelsea, just like Amy, claiming that she has befriended an imaginary girl named Jody, which is now the name belonging to one of the murdered DeFeo children. Very different than the original. One night, the couple decides to go out for a date night, where they hire a local babysitter named Lisa, who's kind of a bitch and a little obsessed with the house. And we find out she used to babysit for the DeFeos. Where after Kathy and George leave, she tells the kids about the murder, which they did not know about, leading to Chelsea then to tell her that Jody said that she was a bad babysitter. And this is where it is revealed that Jody was the reason the DeFeos fired Lisa before the murders took place. Billy then dares Lisa to go inside the closet that Jody was murdered in, where she suddenly gets locked inside, and after a few seconds, she encounters Jody herself and begs to be let out, where she then goes into shock and the paramedics arrive to take her away. After that, George's behavior towards Kathy and her children becomes pretty abusive, with the paranormal activity also ramping up. One night, George hears the family dog barking in the boathouse. Now seeming to be kind of possessed, he quickly grabs an axe and proceeds to murder the dog after accidentally mistaking it for a demonic apparition. The children then look for the dog all the next day, and despite Billy's suspicions, George denies knowing where he is or what could have happened to him. This is where the story was losing me. Don't kill the dog, man. Like, the original didn't kill the dog. You didn't have to kill the dog. You fucking suck for that.
Well, the remake, they mentioned that the DeFeo murders, he killed the dog first. I don't think that was in the original story. He killed the dog,
Yeah, I don't
and
remember
like
that.
2 days later, he snapped and killed the family. And I think that was added into the background of the remake so they could have this whole dog scene.
So now that things are ramping up, Kathy asks local priest Father Calloway to bless the home with hopes to eliminate any future paranormal incidences. But Father Calloway suddenly flees the house when he encounters such occurrences himself. Kathy then discovers that the house once belonged to a cult preacher named Reverend Jeremiah Ketchum, whose evil treatment of the local Native American tribe in the 1700s are said to be the cause of the haunting. Right after that, George is walking through the basement of the house where he encounters the ghost of tortured Native Americans who were brutally killed by Ketchum and his followers. He then encounters Ketchum himself, who then turns around and picks up a knife and slits his throat, recreating his suicide, covering George with blood, completely possessing him. Kathy pretty quickly figures out George is possessed by this evil entity, where she then contacts Father Calloway and attempts to flee the home with her children. But the possessed George catches on and attempts to kill them all, following in the footsteps of DeFeo Jr. Kathy manages to fight him off, eventually knocking him unconscious and driving him away from the house in a boat, where he eventually gets far enough away, causing the evil entity to lose its grip on him, returning him to normal. The family then permanently leaves the home, where we then get a title card that tells us that they only made it 28 days and never returned. The ghost of Jody is then shown standing in the now empty house and screaming in terror as the house rearranges itself back to its original state before the family's arrival, where she is then suddenly pulled beneath the floor by a pair of ghost hands. And that is the end of Amityville Horror 2005. Differences. Let's talk about them. So, number one, George's possession. The 1979 George is slowly possessed, even having bits of clarity throughout the movie. 2005 George kind of rapidly becomes manic, violent, and physically abusive.
Yeah. The original really takes their time, and that's something that I did not remember because being younger, I remembered the specific scenes that scared the fuck out of me, and not as much as the day by day. Like it takes a while to get going. And George Lutz in the original, he is kind of himself throughout a lot of that. You
Yeah.
know, he's kind of like a very tough, standoffish, like don't show very much emotion guy from the very beginning, which I think doesn't represent the real George Lutz as much because everybody kind of describes him as super like
Sociable. Yeah.
charismatic and yeah, just not this dark, like tough guy character. But he definitely maintains that personality throughout most of the movie, where with the remake, yeah, it's just he turns on a dime, and it is very quick. Like,
Yeah.
the original literally goes day by day, and, each day is a significant scene in the movie, whereas the remake, I feel like, jumped to, like they get to, like, day 13 or 14 super fast.
Yeah, they're on that gas pedal. I personally like the possession of George more in the original. I will say it's dragged out in the beginning, but and this really is just down to preference. We are totally fine with slow burns, but a lot of people aren't. But the thing that I really like about George's possession is it's not a situation where he's um he's one day he's normal George, the next day he's evil George, right? He has so many moments where he's just himself. Like even when he's grouchy and he's talking about being cold and stuff, like, he's not fully possessed. The house is just fucking with him. But he has a lot of times where he tells his wife, like he's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm getting sick or I'm coming down with." And I feel like that is kind of a more of a realistic possession.
I
You just don't go fucking balls to the wall with a shotgun or an axe to kill your family, just poof out of nowhere.
yeah, I agree. And the remakes, George is much more of a nice, down to earth guy. So when he does become possessed, it's a lot more of a dramatic
Shock,
flip.
yeah.
Like Ryan Reynolds plays that character probably more like the real life George in the beginning of the movie. And because of that, the flip is a lot more dramatic. I feel like a lot of the remake is really getting to the crazy shit, and then that being a majority of the movie, and that being the focus of the movie, whereas a lot more of the original, the base of the movie is showing the slow downfall of George Lutz, which I like a lot more.
Yeah,
I like seeing that gradual,
I agree.
that's what the story was about, whereas, I think the remake went to the last couple chapters and made a whole movie just off of that.
Yeah, I did not really know anything about the real George, so I didn't really compare either actor's performance to the real one. That is a very interesting thing to bring up. I didn't know that. But in my comparison a little bit later on, I compared kind of the two performances of just what I thought as an actor in a movie did, you know? But,
Yeah.
that's a really good point. It's really interesting to bring that up. Alright, so the second big difference is the style of the movie. The 1979 film relies on tension and the relationship of the family members, with a big focus on the religious aspect of the haunting. The remake relies more on scary imagery, gruesome ghosts, and jump scares. Very different styles here.
Yeah. Yeah, incredibly different, and, when we talked about this the other night, that 2005, it's very easy to pick up a paranormal horror movie and put it in and be able to determine if it came out in 2005 through,
Yeah,
we'll say 2000 through 2010.
yeah, I
Like
agree.
like that time period, which in my opinion is kind of the weakest in horror,
Agree.
it's so much stuff was done over and over again, especially with paranormal movies, which is why, we're kind of seen and almost describe ourselves as not a big fan of paranormal movies, whereas I don't think that's necessarily true. It's just there's
That
so
version.
many that's been done so many times. And whereas the original in 1979
Yeah.
was a movie about the gradual downfall. The remake is literally just a ghost movie. I feel like it's a movie about the peak of the haunting.
Yeah, if I were to simplify the style of these two movies into today's time, I would say the 1979 is like a A24 movie, and the 2005 is a Blumhouse movie.
Yeah, yeah. With the 79 being a lot more of a slow burn, a lot more of the psychological aspect of it, really like diving deep into the day by day, the slow transformation of this character, George Lutz.
It has a little bit of style of like a Hereditary,
Yeah,
where
I
it's
could,
just this slow burn about this family.
yeah,
I mean, I will say, like, the 2005, the family is I personally think that there was a lot more communication with the family in the 2005, but I feel like the 79 version is a believable family.
yeah. The story alone, like even from the ghost aspect, is a lot more believable.
Yeah.
You actually don't, and it's one of the things I love about the movie, outside of one scene, I think, you don't see the ghost. You don't get to actually see them. You see things that happen as a result of the ghost. Whereas in 2005, paranormal haunted house movies were just going as far as they could possibly go. And by this point, the whole movie was the peak of the haunting.
Yeah.
They skip through everything else and jump through the story as fast as they can so they can get to the peak of the haunting and try to make a movie just off of that one point in the story and show these crazy, super scary looking ghosts and CGI, like
Yeah.
a lot of CGI stuff. And I think that's why when a movie like Paranormal Activity came out, it was
It
such
was
a
a refreshing.
success
Yeah.
because it was so different from
Everything
all
else,
the
yeah.
other fucking paranormal movies that they were getting up until that point from 2000 on.
You could agree or disagree, and it's not offense to anything, but for me personally, the 2005, you could literally slap The Conjuring, Amityville Horror on it. It seems like a Conjuring movie or Insidious movie. It has that feel, and it's shiny, and it's pretty, and it's big production, and I really do like the '79 version where it's dim, it's dark, because it really makes you get the feel of that house, to how dark it is, and kind of a little bit, like, lived in and a little dingy at times. I really like that style. A lot of these 2 movies is preference. You know, it's not we're not I don't think either one of us are saying the 2005 is bad.
Well,
It's
I
just
don't know.
preference.
There's parts of the 2005 that I do think is bad.
I agree, but as
I
a
don't think.
movie, I'm not gonna harp on somebody who likes that better.
Yeah, yeah, everybody has their opinion,
Yeah.
and obviously there is people who don't care for as slow-paced movies that are gonna like the 2005 better. There's gonna be people who don't care about the real life aspect of it, or the believability or truthfulness. They wanna see jump scares and creepy looking shit, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but, if you think about it, you made The Conjuring comparison, and I was really surprised for a long time that The Conjuring didn't do Amityville, and then I thought about it later on, and I assumed it was over rights. They don't have those story
Well, no,
rights, they
anybody
can't.
can.
Yeah, they
I don't know if they can do the Lutz's story, but that's why there's so many Amityville movies, is it's not really copywritten correctly.
yeah, I think they would need to do the Lutz story because they touch so much on the real life events regarding the Conjuring movies, and I think that's a really cool aspect of the Conjuring movies, although a lot of them are very much the same. But if you think about it, the basis of the Conjuring movies was the
The Amityville
Amityville
Horror.
Horror.
Yeah.
They literally took the idea that the Amityville Horror used, which is the most famous and really few examples of real life horror stories that are ghost stories that were turned around and made into movies. There is like Haunting in Connecticut. There's other examples of it, but the Amityville Horror was by far the most famous of those. And they took that idea and said, okay, well, let's take these
Other cases,
two
yeah.
two two real life famous paranormal ghost hunters, and let's go to their other most famous cases and do what the Amityville Horror did.
Yeah. Yeah, you're exactly right.
They made a whole franchise out of it.
Yeah, made a lot of money. So, number 3, the backstory. So the original relies mostly on the DeFeo murders and the local Native American tribe using the land as burial ground, along with a Satanist living in the home many years before. The 2005 version completely changes the ghost of Jody and adds a fictionalized backstory involving an evil reverend who builds torture cells in the basement, killing the local Native Americans. So in the 1979, the natives are kind of the cause for this. In 2005, they have now shifted to the victims of a serial killer.
Yeah.
Very different, which makes sense though, because a lot of people's outlook on Native American, it was very different in the 70s and 80s. And kind of as we move to the 80s, 90s, and eventually the 2000s, people do have a lot of sympathy for Native Americans because what was done to them. And I guess when they made the 2005, I don't know if they thought it would look bad to keep it that way, or they were wanting some, favoritism from people who kind of like the activist type people. But either way, they completely changed that.
Yeah.
I mean, like white and black. I mean, very different.
Yeah. They definitely go a lot more extreme too. Like with the
Yeah, torture in the
yeah,
house,
like
and
it's way over the top.
they got this blood like a ditch, like in the concrete,
Yeah.
right? And, my issue is not them changing how the Native Americans come into play here. My issue is how amped up it got
Yeah,
with
I agree.
the blood drain, and I still am not sure what he was doing with
For
collecting all that blood.
for a movie that is famous for being based off of a true
Yeah.
story, and I think that's the real intrigue of Amityville.
You
That
think that was
me
the new evidence they found?
Yeah, I found what looked like possibly
A
a
blood
ditch.
ditch. A blood drain.
It was an old drainage ditch, and they were
Yeah.
like, "That could have been used to drain blood.
Yep.
That's evidence.
Yep.
We'll put it in the movie."
We'll create
Uh,
a whole new movie just for it.
yeah. Yeah, the believability, like, that was one thing that really sucked me in as a kid, is knowing that this was based off of a true story. It was a real life case. I didn't know the details then. And they do the 79 version, and, like we said, it's kind of the telling of this slowly happening over this, like, 2-week period. It's a lot more believable.
Yeah.
And for a movie that is really that's its selling point, the 2005 version goes so over the top.
Goes too far.
It's like, okay, this can't really be part of the actual story.
It's fit.
And, you look at like A Haunting in Connecticut, which I think was a really good paranormal haunted house movie, and they go pretty far. And that's based off a true story, but at least like the whole like that being a place where it was actual funeral home slash
Yeah, yeah.
morgue, like at least that part of it was true. Whereas this whole backstory stuff is not true at all.
Yeah. I would say when it comes to that stuff, if the 79 was the original Paranormal Activity, the 2005 is Paranormal Activity Ghost Dimension. Like time travel, all kinds of just you go from something that's kind of believable to something that's it's trying to build off of the original story, but it's gotten
It's
so
just yeah.
far out there.
It's because with every one, they try to outdo
Yeah.
the last, and that's what made the original Paranormal Activity so great, is it was so realistic and believable. And it was this movie about a ghost where you don't actually see the ghost the whole movie. And with it getting, like, so crazy with the flashbacks, it really makes you, like, even if you're somebody who don't know the real story or the people who've come along and said it was fake and it was made up, even if you know none of that background, by the end of this movie, you gotta be thinking like, "There's no way this is real." They took a story that's supposed to be based on a true story, which is really the intrigue of. I mean, even with The Conjuring, still every Conjuring that's come out, I've looked up and read into the real story after I've seen it. Just because there's an intrigue that this is somewhat based on a real life story, it then makes me wanna know what parts of the movie was legitimate and what parts weren't. And when they get so crazy, and the same thing happens when I see a Conjuring movie, I'm like, "Okay, I guarantee when I look this up that this wasn't
Yeah.
part of the actual story."
60% of this movie is written.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the last big difference will be the ending. The 1979 film ends with the family fleeing after George kind of comes to his senses, even rescuing the dog from the tar-filled basement. The 2005 version features a climax where George traps the family on the roof and tries to kill them before being saved by Kathy, where she then gets him far enough away from the house to become unpossessed. So in one, George is kind of the hero, and the other, Kathy is kind of the hero. So
Ah,
very different. Again, it's a preference thing. I lean towards the original ending because that feels like a real family. I do like the betrayal of Kathy being the hero in the end of I think that she did a really good job. I'm not opposed to that ending. The part that I don't really like about it is the putting him in the boat and driving him just so far away and he just suddenly becomes normal. But I do like, I'm fine with Kathy becoming the hero at the end of this. I just don't like the other part of that. But I do like the ending to with the original far better.
yeah, I agree. I think the ending to the original, like, I love that he goes back in for the dog.
Same. That's big
Like,
points for me.
I mean, that's kinda realistic too, like, a lot of people are thinking, like, "No fucking way,"
That's a family
but
member,
if you
man.
have a fucking dog that you're that close with, especially when your kid's in the seat, like, crying that you're leaving the dog, like, as a dad, you're 100% gonna at least strongly considering running back in that fucking house. And then with the 2005, he done killed the dog, which was super fucked up. I don't think it needed to be in there, but yeah, the whole climax is a lot more crazy. The
They're
crazy
on the roof.
flashbacks with the torture,
It's like
and
4
then
stories
like
high.
he's got her like under the boat with her hair like caught up in the motor, and like then sets her free, but then chases her down to kill her again, and he falls off of a 3-story house onto his face and is, like, fine.
Yeah, they
Like, bro,
also
your whole face, like, all of your facial bones would have been shattered.
they kinda changed the possession too because he's not possessed in the fact like this Satanist or whatever has him possessed and trying to kill them. This Satanist is making his family's faces look like demons. That's why he's trying to kill them. And I don't think that was, like, in any way, shape, or form a part of the original. Obviously, they couldn't do the face transformation, but it was never mentioned or anything like that. So, I mean, I don't personally like that type of possession, but it's not, like, a big enough deal. This part I just don't like is, like, we'll just get him 500 feet from the house and the possession goes away.
Yeah.
It's like,
I
eh. And the
I
whole roof thing
like,
is too
the
much.
leading up to the possession, yeah, I mentioned this because you mentioned the making the family's face look like, these evil demonic faces. Like, right at the beginning of the climax, like, the beginning of the end, he is sitting in the basement, like, crying, watching these home videos. That was taken 2 weeks ago. He's, like, reminiscing, crying, and all I
I didn't
see
even
is
think about that.
Ryan Reynolds literally crying, watching these home videos. It's like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation when he gets
Yeah.
stuck in the attic
He's
and
watching his
finds the old, like, Super 8
he's
film.
watching, like, when the kids were little kids and when his
Yeah,
parent yeah.
he does that same thing, but it was taken 14 days before this.
It's been a long 2 weeks.
I was like, "What are you reminiscing on 2 weeks ago? Like, you forgot that fast?"
Yeah,
It's a long life as a demon.
before his hands had blisters from chopping so much wood.
Time moves different when you're possessed.
Yeah.
It's before he hated his kids, his wife's biological kids.
Yeah. Alright, so before we jump into the head-to-head, I just got a couple questions, a little bit of a couple short discussions. So, the house looks completely different in the remake. I didn't like it. So what they did was they obviously couldn't use the real house, and they weren't, like, super concerned about it looking very much like the real house, so they basically paid to use another house they found in Connecticut, and they added just the 2 windows, and I think they also added on the side, it's like the line of windows or whatever, which I think in the real house is like the den. We know that the real house, those 2 windows are directly above that line of windows, and it's actually on the side of the home. In the remake, the 2, like, the evil eye windows that everyone knows is right above the front door. So,
Mhm.
in this house, in the remake is a lot bigger, it is a lot taller, and it's set up differently. Now, like, do you have one that you like over the other?
I didn't pay close attention to the actual structure of the house and how they were different in the 2 movies. I did look close at the house from the original, and I know that they filmed in a different location, but they wanted them to get the feel of the house so much that they actually, during filming, took the cast and crew. It was either right before they started filming or during filming, and they went to the real life house.
Hmm,
And
didn't
they
know
all,
that.
like yeah, they went through the real life house so they could get a feel of what this place was and, like, what the atmosphere in here felt like, and I I feel like that the house in the original was a lot more true to the house from the real life house, and I think that them doing that is just more proof. Like, the movie makers went as far as taking them to the real house so they could see this and get the real feeling before they started shooting or during shooting to really to capture that real life, like, because you gotta think whenever this was done, this house was super famous
Yeah,
because of this book,
they're
like,
telling the story
they
of a
said
book.
when they went there, news reporters went there and covered them going through the house, and, that just goes to show you how famous this house was at the time, whereas I think by the remake the house being at well, this is the best way I can put it. In the original, the house feels like a character.
Yes,
Like, it
I
feels
agree.
like a character in the movie, whereas in the remake, that is kinda brushed off for
The
the
ghost,
little girl's friend,
yeah, the
Jody.
ghost,
I think it's
flashing,
yeah,
creepy shit. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Jody is more of the takes place at the house, and I know
Yeah.
she mentions Jody in both of the movies, like, both of them have this imaginary friend named Jody, but in the remake, that's a lot more of the character that you think is haunting the house for most of the movie, whereas in the original, they don't show the ghosts like that, and the house really feels like its own character.
Yeah, I noticed it immediately when I turned the remake on. I noticed the difference, and I personally think it's just a mistake. 9 times out of 10, when you do a movie like this, it's not really noticed or nobody really care. Like, The Haunting in Connecticut doesn't look anything like the movie one, don't care. I mean, all kinds of these haunted house movies based off of real stuff. But I think this is the one fucking house that you have to get right because it is the most famous horror house, real life house I think there is.
Yeah, I would
And it
agree.
is and everybody knows that every single picture that you've ever seen from the road is those 2 windows and then that kind of row of windows below it. And they completely changed that. Like, in the remake, you can't even see those 2 windows from the road. You have to pull into that kinda long driveway on the side that curves around and, like, parks almost in the front yard, which from the road would be, like, the side yard, and those 2 windows are above, like, the front door, the entrance, which from the road kinda looks like the side of the house. And then they also, in the remake, they put a big, like, one of those, like, circle rooms on the side of it, like, almost like, like a castle would have with the big
Mm.
pointy roof, and that's not on the and I just think it's like, "Man, this is, like, the one house that you can't fucking alter because it's so recognizable," and I think it's a mistake, but, I get most people aren't gonna harp on that, but I just think it's a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, they probably thought, like, the 2 windows and, the
That was
basic
enough, yeah.
shape was big enough, and, I get that. Like I said, I didn't pay attention to structurally the differences. You see those 2 windows and the shape, and
Yeah,
you kinda
I get it.
know, but I do agree that it is the most famous haunted house in movie history
Yep.
that at least that exists in real life as a actual house that's haunted, supposedly. You gotta try to stay true to that as much as possible. One thing I did notice about the original house that is different, and it's actually the remake and the original house, they're a lot more secluded than what the real life house is. And that's one
Oh,
thing
that's a good point.
when they took them there, and that was my first thought when I seen the house in the original, is a couple of years ago that the real life house went up for sale, and I looked at a bunch of pictures of it, and it's super, super expensive, And it's not because of the movie, just a really, really expensive area to live in. Like, all the houses that go up for sale in that neighborhood, it's
Millions, yeah.
very old, you know, very old, famous neighborhood, and they're just $1,000,000 houses, all
Yeah,
of
it's on a lake or something too, yeah.
but you definitely had pretty close neighbors, whereas the house in the movies, especially the original is very secluded. Like,
They're almost
almost
like a vacation house,
yeah, you
you
would think
know?
it's on its own plot of land
Yeah, like a summer
with no
house,
neighbors next door, and that's not the case at all. This is in
a
a
neighborhood.
neighborhood.
Alright, so, not directly comparing to the real one, when it comes to George, man, performance-wise, Ryan Reynolds, James Brolin.
James Brolin. Ryan Reynolds, I think, definitely pretty much has his nice guy character and his really angry possessed, and there's not a whole lot of in the middle. Whereas the original James Brolin, there's a lot of scenes in the middle of this movie where you can't really like you have to ask yourself like, well, is that just his personality or is this him kind of starting to get possessed or
Yeah.
is he being fucked with? He's in the middle of that possessed and not possessed for a lot of the movie.
Weapons. That's one you've seen very recently. You know the main dad who loses his son in that one?
Yeah.
This is dad. James Brolin is his father.
No, I
Yeah,
did
yeah.
not know that.
Yeah, for me, man, James Brolin, I felt like he could be a real person. I felt like he was very believable as a guy who is financially stressed out and he's trying to run this business and he's trying to move and like I really felt in the one of the spots that I really felt him being realistic, a very realistic, believable character was the $1,500.
Yeah.
When he tells his like brother-in-law, he's like, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." That is like but you see the stress. And then when like, he's trying to hold it back when he tells this guy, he's like, "It's gotta be here somewhere." And he is willing to step up and help this guy, and when that shit goes fucking missing, you can feel that scene.
Yeah.
Like, that is a scene. Yeah, and
Well, I think that anybody who's ever been under extreme financial stress really feels that.
yeah,
Like, you can feel that the actor, has probably been through some serious financial stress at some point because he puts a ton of emotion when he finds that little rapper that had the money
yeah,
and it's gone,
mhm,
the way he just snaps and loses it. And that's one thing I love about the original that they completely cut out of the remake was the financial aspect.
yeah,
His like business partner or the guy who works right under him,
yeah,
like showing up and being like, "Hey, payroll needs to go out," and he don't even know what fucking day it is, and he knows that he's broke and there's
yeah.
no money, and that's one thing that, like, in the remake, they completely skip all of that.
They
It's like,
mention it
okay,
one time
this
when they're
guy
buying the house, and that's it.
this guy clearly owns a business, like, he mentions he's a contractor, he has it marked on his vehicle. You know that he makes a decent amount of money to buy such a nice house, but it obviously is a little outside of what they can afford. So you're like, "Okay, well, this guy definitely works, and he's definitely a blue collar guy." He says he's a contractor, but he never works, and
Yeah,
they never mention work, and I love the guy who works for him coming there and being like, "Hey, we can't get a hold of you. You got a check that bounced." The guys literally, made me promise I would hand deliver this to you. Like, everybody's waiting to get paid, and he's just completely at this point in the movie, like, he don't even know what day it is.
yeah,
He knows he don't have the money to pay them, like, he's in way over his head, which just adds to him being angry and stressed out and makes him a lot more vulnerable for, something to possess him. and it's a lot more of the aspect of, when I say that the original is really about his downfall and not as much the climax of his downfall, which I think makes for a much better story,
Yeah.
a much better, story in a traditional
It
storytelling.
makes you root for him.
You have different acts, you have, this up, down, all the way up to this climax, and you hit this climax, and that's the end. Whereas the remake is really climaxed for a third of the movie, and it's at the peak of the haunting for two-thirds of the movie.
Yeah, at the end, the original, you're rooting for him. Like, even though he has turned into the bad guy, you're rooting for him to somehow come back. The remake, I don't know, this probably isn't everybody, but I didn't really care. If she'd have killed him and took off on the boat, I would have been fine either way. I didn't care.
Well, you're kinda surprised that she does save him,
Yeah,
like, even the kids say in the movie, like, "Why are you putting him in the boat?"
yeah.
And, yeah, you don't care about his character in the remake, but in the original, you still see him as the good guy who is in a really bad situation.
All right, so the last thing is, so Kathy Lutz, Margaret Kidder, Melissa George. This was a hard one.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the, original Kathy.
Margaret Kidder from
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Black
yeah,
Christmas. Yeah.
yeah, I really, really think that she does a great job. I think they both do a great job. I will say in the remake, she is very much like a mom who has, gotten married, has these 3 kids from another marriage. She's trying to really balance, that weird, like, there's this new guy she's married, her kids kinda have this weird thing against him. There's, like, the discipline aspect. Anybody who's ever had a step-parent knows that this can be a really hard line to balance, and I think that is focused on a little bit more in the remake, and the the girl who plays her in the remake really does a good job at that, but the original, I don't have any flaws, and she plays that character, I think, fantastic.
She does. I think Margaret Kidder does a fantastic job. I personally like Melissa George as Kathy Lutz better. I can see that she has more love for her husband, her kid. Like, that affection is displayed a lot more to me, and her care of, like, I've gotta figure out what's going on, I've gotta get to the bottom of this, was a lot more emotion than what I seen out of Margaret Kidder. I feel like Melissa George was becoming affected by the house a lot sooner, maybe. I don't really know if I would pick one or the other, but I liked Melissa George's portrayal better.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, so it is time to go head to head with some points. All right, so since I picked this, I'll go first. My original, I got tone and atmosphere. I gave it an 8. It's got a lot of tone and atmosphere. I think this movie really rides on tone and atmosphere. Characters and performances, another 8. I did take away some points because I feel like we didn't really get almost anything out of the kids in the original. So direction and style. I did give it a 7 because it's kind of slow. Like, I liked watching it this time, but I have tried to watch it in the past, especially when I was younger, and it was very boring. Impact on the genre. I gave it a 9. This thing had a big impact on kind of ghost house, haunted house type movies. This was huge. Kills and effects. I gave it a 3. The effects they're not super great. There was some things that looked okay. There's also not a lot of effects in this. It's kind of more like what you were saying earlier. It's almost like some of that stuff's left up to your imagination. And then our bonus category being the house, the Amityville house itself. I gave it a 10, dude, because this movie turned this house into something that is still recognized by people who have never even seen it. Like, this is one of the most recognizable homes, I think, just for kind of general people, but especially for horror fans. So what do you got for the original?
Alright, so for tone and atmosphere, I went with a 7. Characters and performances, I went with a 7 as well. I agree that we don't get a whole lot out of the kids. You know, we that's a massive chunk of the movie that the story that we kinda don't get a whole lot of.
I thought the priest was over. I think he was a little bit exaggerated as well in the original. I don't know if you thought
Well,
anything about him, but
I thought that he being over exaggerated was much, much better and more realistic than the babysitter from the remake
oh
being
god,
over
yeah.
exaggerated. We'll
Yeah.
get to that.
Yeah.
Direction and style, I gave this one a 8. I like the slower burn because of what it is showing, which is, the pretty much George Lutz's downfall, where, we don't get that as much in the remake. Impact, I gave this a 8. Like you were saying, this is a massive, massive movie as far as paranormal and ghost movies. But also for myself, like, the impact that this had on me, I put that, I put it as a high score because I think it definitely, and I probably mentioned it on the show, like, there's a handful of movies, The Evil Dead, the original
Yeah,
Poltergeist,
yeah.
this movie, The Exorcist, like, those movies that really, like, scared me as a kid. Effects, I gave it a 6. Not a whole lot of effects, but, like, the house bleeding, the blood coming from under the stairs and stuff, like, I thought that that was done really good. And I think that this movie, I really like that you don't see the ghost, and, you kinda see the effects of the ghost. Therefore, we don't need a whole lot of special effects. However, with that said, like, the pig in the window didn't look good.
Yeah,
That
it
was
did
the
not
really
come out good.
Yeah, that was the one, like, really bad looking thing to me, so I gave it a 6 there, and then the house, I gave it a 8. I felt like the house was its own character in this movie.
We were pretty neck and neck. I mean, we were like 1 point apart on everything up until kills and effects. Still not super far off, but yeah, we're really close on this.
Yeah, so I don't wanna knock it too much on the effects because it wasn't a and I think the remake is a really good example to what I'm about to say. It wasn't necessary to have too many effects.
No.
So I'm gonna grade it on the effects that was necessary. I'd rather very little but good looking effects to where you have too much effects for the story.
All right, so remake. Tone and atmosphere is gonna be a 6 for me. Characters and performances is gonna be a 4. I thought the performances were, for the most part, fine. It was just the characters just were not. I didn't feel for them, I didn't root for them. Like I said, I did like Melissa George, but that was really the only character that I had any kind of connection to. Direction and style. I gave it an 8, man. This movie's got fucking style, and the direction, like, is on point because this thing speeds. It does a speed run through this story. Impact on the genre, 3. This thing didn't have a massive impact. It did kind of help start this kind of this eventual style, but I don't think that this movie itself did that. Kills and effects, I give it a 7. It has a lot of effects. It has a lot of stuff going on. That's not really my thing. I don't like it, but it doesn't negate the fact that it had them. And then the bonus, the house, it is going to be a 6. I've already discussed earlier my kind of issues with the house. It doesn't look bad. It's not bad. It's just, I think those changes were unnecessary. All right. So what you got?
So tone and atmosphere, I gave it a 7, which is what
Again, neck and neck, man.
yeah, that's what I gave the original. As far as like the tone, I think it has a very moody tone, which a lot of those 2000s
Mhm.
movies that I was talking about, they really have that just moody, almost emo tone to
Yeah.
them. Characters and performances, I gave it a 3. I don't think that, like, Ryan Reynolds is just too Ryan Reynolds
Yeah,
to me.
agreed. Totally agreed.
And then also, the characters were written, Kathy Lutz, I think, was really good. Outside of that, I don't care for a lot of the characters, like, the babysitter was
Terrible.
so overwritten,
Terrible.
like, and so unrealistic.
Yeah.
Like, this girl just, like, babysat for this family who was just murdered,
She plays
and
basic
she's like
bitch, like 17-year-old bitchy girl. Like,
yeah,
that's what she
and it's
plays.
just but it's way too, we were talking about this the other day, I don't know what we were comparing it to, but we were talking about a lot of these 2000 movies and how the
Oh,
characters
like
are
the WB?
overwritten.
The
The
WB
the
shows?
the
Yeah.
she's like the Paris Hilton of House of Wax,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
that overwritten
Mhm.
character that nobody actually acts like that. Like, you may get, like,
A little bit, yeah.
bitchy, very poppy, 17-year-olds, but they're never quite this extreme, like, to where an entire family and these kids that she babysat were murdered, and she thinks it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just awful character
One of them
writing.
being a child,
Yeah.
too, yeah.
Direction and style, I gave this one a 5. I do like its style, like I said, in tone and atmosphere, it's very, moody, it's very dark, it has a good feel to it, but the direction, I feel like with the way they went with the end and how just ridiculous the end got, really killed it for me in direction. Like, the direction that they went with that story was just they tried to add this whole other story behind the actual real life story, and it was just too much. They just tried to add too much of the backstory in there. Impact, I gave it a 2. I don't think it had a fucking bit of impact at all. And I think that this category, I was thinking about it, and it really is kind of not fair to the remake movies, because the originals are almost always going to have a better impact if it was a big enough movie to get a remake. And there's not a lot of remakes that have a massive impact on the genre itself. But regardless, it is what it is. It got a 2. I
I
don't think
mean,
it didn't have an impact. I think the way to look at that, though, is not as much impact on the genre, and this is kinda why I graded the original the way I did, is I also look at it as a big impact on myself personally, and that is kinda even if you look at it from that perspective.
yeah, I mean, there are some. I mean, The Fly, which we covered, that is a remake. The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing is a remake.
Those are both good points, and those both had way bigger impacts on the genre than their originals. So, yeah, looking at it like that, it's a good point. Effects, I gave the remake a 5. They did have a lot of effects, but what really brings it down for me is some of the CGI that they had in there. I feel like the overuse of CGI and using the effects, like super overdone makeup for jump scares, is just something that has been done a million times and had been done not quite a million times yet at this point, but a good 500,000.
Yeah, a lot.
And then the house, I gave it a 7. I do not think that it's bad.
Yeah, it's
I
not
don't
bad.
I don't think it's bad at all. It didn't feel as much like a character
Agree.
like the house in the original, but I still think they did a pretty good job overall with the house.
All right, so we are going to have Jordan, the human calculator, add these points up and tell us, is the original a classic or did the remake trash it? All right, you got it all added up.
Yep. So for our total, let's see, you gave the original a 45 out of a possible 60 points, and you gave the remake a 34 out of a
Whoa.
possible 60. whereas mine was the original was a 44 compared to the remake at a 29, with the grand total added together at a original getting a 89 out of a possible 120 compared to a 63 out of a possible 120. So barely over the 50% mark for the remake.
Wow, dang, man. I didn't really think the remake was gonna be that far behind it, but honestly, after sitting and discussing everything, it makes sense at this point. And the really cool thing about these episodes is we don't have any discussions about these movies. Like we watch them separately, we score them separately, and then we literally go over everything here. And that's one thing I really love about this show. So 89
To
to
63.
63.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's really most of the most everything's pretty close. Like looking at my numbers here, as far as categories, like the characters and performances was the biggest difference until we got to Impact. Impact was a major difference. And that really holds up. Like when I look at this movie, what stands out the most for me is the characters and the way they were written and the performances. Direction and style is the next biggest difference, and that is, obviously I like the original. I love the direction and the storytelling aspect of showing how this all happened as opposed to skipping to what is happening and the movie being just about the climax of that. And then, with the impact, obviously, there is a major difference. Whereas one was a, you know, a sand on a beach of grains of sand, it came out and when all these remakes were happening and they were getting backed by, big studios and big name actors and all this money thrown at it. And outside of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a lot of those didn't really live up. They weren't great. And the other was kind of a groundbreaking story. It was this massive book. It was this media sensation. And it was such a big deal when the actors went to the house. Like the media and the news were literally following them in, trying to get interviews about them making this movie. And, it really shows. Like it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, one of the big things about remake versus original is not, we don't have the idea that it's neck and neck with like half the episodes are going to be the remake. Most of the time it's going to be the original. But the point is to see how far behind is the remake. Now, there are going to be some remakes that is going to be extremely difficult for us. Dawn of the Dead is a really good example. If
Yeah.
you want to say Evil Dead, that is also a really good example. There are going to be some very hard ones. But in this case, I had no idea what was going to happen here. And that's why I really wanted to do these. But yeah, man, like that's, the point is like, oh, the original one again. That's not the point. It's let's talk about the good and the bad between both movies, compare them. And yeah, the original is probably going to win, but how close is the remake? And in this case, the remake was drastically different. But yeah, man, like I said, not a huge haunted house type possession guy. And I was not super familiar with either one of these movies. So I really felt like I went into this very, very neutral. And honestly, I was really excited to see which one I was going to like better. I was super surprised to see how different these were. I didn't think they were this drastically different.
Yeah, they're much different. Although they cover the same story, one covers it completely different from the way the other one does.
Well,
Uh,
at the end of the day, they're actually both made for two completely different audiences. The original is trying to tell this true story because of this massive success of a book, so it has to somewhat stay in the realm of reality. The remake doesn't have those constraints, and considering, a lot of people have somewhat debunked the book by 2005, The remake actually has the freedom to take the foundation of the story and amp it up times 5.
And people like that, man. There's a reason why the Conjuring franchise has made so much money.
Yeah, the remake is there to sell movie tickets, not tell the story of this family who, lived in a haunted house for 28 days. And I think that drastically changes the end result here.
Well, yeah, they were the George Lutz was directly helping them make this movie.
Yeah.
He was there on set. He was talking to them. This is his family being portrayed. Whereas by the time the remake is made, like you said, which I didn't know about, he didn't even know about this.
And
Like
he died.
he tried to sue.
Yeah, he
So
died a year later.
yeah, it's much different, whereas the original is real people and it's actual real lives and then being portrayed, and the people who the story is about actually have a vested interest in how they are shown on screen. The remake doesn't have those. And I with the scores, I find it really interesting because, judging by hearing you had the movies as a little closer than what I do in my mind. The original was always special to me.
Yeah, I don't have that.
It was always one of those first movies that scared me, and it had an actual effect on me as a kid. I remember the first time I seen it, and I remember the specific, like, the closet scene with the babysitter always stuck out to me, like, that one horrified me for some reason. I remember when you first read the book and told me that a bunch of it was fake and all, like, I remember the moment that I found out that a bunch of the Amityville Horror could be made up.
Oh, it was like
Like,
Santa.
yeah, it was, and it literally was worse than Santa.
Yeah.
It was because, by the time I was told about Santa, I already knew for years. Whereas this, I didn't. It was gut-wrenching. There's no way, you gotta be wrong. And, because of that, it very much, doesn't surprise me that in the scores, you do have them a little closer. Like,
Yeah, I
you
don't have
have it.
I don't have a connection to either movie.
Yeah, you actually have the original 1 point higher than I do, so they're very close. We're within going into a blind rating out of 60 points for us to be within 1 point of each other is pretty fucking close.
Yeah, remember
So
this.
we view these movies very much the same, but, when you go into the remake aspect of it, I'm at a 29 and you're at a 34.
Yeah, the original this past week was the first time I've ever watched the whole entire original. Like, this is, coming, right off of my essentially first time watch. But what it really comes down to is what kind of horror films do you enjoy? There's a lot of people who hate slow burn realistic films, and they just want their next 2 hours to be exciting and fun. And that is where the remake appeals. That is where I think, remember I said you kind of got a 60-40 in people who like this. That is that 40. And we see with, like we were saying earlier, movies like The Conjuring and Insidious, there is a massive fan base for that. So us saying the original was better is just our opinion. If you like the remake better, I get it. I totally get it. I will say though, despite the original being like a lot more my style, if I had to show a friend who isn't like a diehard horror movie fan, like one of these movies, it would be the remake because it is fast paced, it has scary ghost shit, and it's not really something you have to think hard about. It's a entertaining movie.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why there's such a big market for it and why the Conjuring movies do so good is you have that market that is not big horror movie fans. Those are the type of movies that they go to, people who watch maybe one horror movie a year or two
Yeah.
on a date night, going to, the movies in October and saying, "Oh, it's Halloween time. Let's go see a scary movie at the movie theater." Those are the type of movies, like haunted house movies. They have that massive non-horror fan market.
Yeah.
Whereas like a slasher, most people who go into a slasher are horror fans.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to know what the listeners think though. Are you a fan of the original or the remake? Hey, you might like them both. That's totally fine. I love to hear other people's takes on this. Once again, we thank you guys for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. I fucking love these episodes. Please send us some ideas. Like, what do you want to hear on the next remake versus original? We would love to hear what movies you personally want to see go head to head. We've even talked about just doing similar movies, not necessarily connected, just similar head to heads. So you can throw that out there too. Please give us a follow or like if you enjoy the show. Check out the website, check out the socials, and we will catch you next time.